It's embarrassing to admit this, but I rolled my eyes the second I opened the box. I mean, it was supposed to be an anniversary gift, not whatever that was. My name's Cassandra. I'm 34, and I guess you could say I didn't handle it well. Ryan, my husband, sat across from me with this hopeful look on his face, like he had just handed me the moon, but it wasn't the moon. It was a bracelet. A bracelet. Not even a fancy one. Just some silver thing with a tiny charm. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't expecting diamonds dripping off my wrist, but for our 5th anniversary, I thought maybe he'd put in more effort. Something thoughtful, romantic, memorable. "Do you like it?" he asked, and I could tell he was trying so hard to read my reaction. I tried to fake a smile, but it came out all wrong. "Yeah, it's cute," I said, but I couldn't hide the tone. You know the tone. The one that says I'm lying through my teeth. His face fell, and suddenly I felt this wave of guilt and frustration. I didn't want to ruin the moment, but at the same time, I couldn't help thinking, why does he always do this? Ryan knows I like nice things. It's not like I'm subtle about it. I'd dropped hints for months about this necklace I saw online, and instead I got a bracelet that looked like it came from a mall kiosk. I know how this sounds. I do. But here's the thing. Ryan and I have been through a lot this year. Money's been tight ever since his hours got cut at work, and I've been picking up the slack where I can. I've even skipped a couple of salon appointments to save a little extra, which is a big deal for me because I take pride in how I look. So, yeah, maybe I was hoping for something that showed he appreciates all I've been doing. Is that so wrong? I placed the bracelet back in the box and set it on the table. "Thanks," I said flatly. But the damage was already done. Ryan let out this sigh, the kind that's half frustration, half defeat. "You don't like it," he said. It wasn't a question. I crossed my arms. "It's not that I don't like it. I just thought, I don't know, maybe you'd put a little more thought into it." "Cassie, we're broke," he snapped. For a second I was stunned. He almost never raises his voice at me. "I can't exactly go all out right now. I thought this was something you'd actually wear." "That's not the point," I shot back. "It's not about the money. It's about the effort. You didn't even ask me what I wanted." His jaw tightened, and I could tell he was trying to keep his cool. "Effort? Are you serious right now? Do you have any idea how hard I worked to get this for you? How many hours I put in just to afford something halfway decent?" "Halfway decent is right," I muttered under my breath. And that's when things really blew up. "You know what, Cassie? I can't win with you. No matter what I do, it's never enough. You're always focused on what you don't have instead of what you do." His voice was sharp now, cutting through me in a way that made my chest tighten. I stood up from the table, arms still crossed, and glared at him. Maybe if you stepped up for once, I wouldn't have to point out what's missing. That hit a nerve. I knew it the second the words left my mouth, but I was too fired up to care. Ryan's face hardened, and he leaned back in his chair looking at me like I was a stranger. "Step up," he said slowly, almost like he was daring me to repeat it. "I've been doing everything I can to keep us afloat, Cassie. Meanwhile, all you care about is whether or not I can keep you happy. God forbid you actually care about me for once." That shut me up for a second. I just stood there, staring at him, completely caught off guard. He'd never said anything like that to me before. Sure, we'd argued plenty of times, But this felt different. It felt final, like something had cracked between us, and there was no putting it back together. I didn't know what to say, so I just stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door behind me. Part of me expected him to follow me, to apologize and make things right like he usually does, but he didn't. He stayed in the kitchen. I could hear him clearing the dishes, his movements loud and deliberate like he was trying to make a point. I flopped down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, my heart racing. I felt angry and guilty and confused all at once. I wanted to be mad at him for ruining our anniversary, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I'd gone too far. Then again, wasn't it his fault for not understanding what I needed? I couldn't help but think about everything I'd sacrificed for him. I could have been with someone who had it all together, someone who could actually provide the life I wanted. But no, I chose Ryan. And for what? A cheap bracelet and an argument that left me feeling more alone than ever. Lying there in the dark, I started to wonder if we'd finally hit the point of no return. I didn't sleep much that night. Ryan never came to bed, and when I woke up in the morning, he was already gone. His side of the bed was untouched, and the kitchen was eerily quiet when I went to grab some coffee. The bracelet was still sitting on the table where I'd left it, the little charm catching the morning light like it was mocking me. I ignored it and grabbed my phone instead. I texted him, "Are we really going to let one fight ruin our anniversary? Let's talk." No response. Hours went by, and nothing. It wasn't like Ryan to ignore me. Even when we were fighting, he had always been the type to calm down and come back around, ready to talk things out. But this time, it felt different. It felt like he was done. By noon, my frustration had boiled over. I started replaying everything from last night in my head, twisting it around until I was the victim. How could he just walk out like that? On our anniversary, no less. Who does that? Sure, I wasn't exactly graceful about the gift, but was that really enough to just leave? I called my best friend, Heather, because I needed someone to back me up. She picked up on the second ring. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I didn't hold back. "Ryan and I got into it last night. He gave me this cheap bracelet for our anniversary, and when I tried to talk to him about it, he completely blew up on me." Heather was quiet for a moment, and I could tell she was trying to figure out how to respond without setting me off. "Okay," she said slowly. "What exactly did you say to him?" I hesitated. "I just told him that I thought he could have put in more effort. I mean, it's not about the money, you know? It's about showing that you care, right?" Heather hummed in response, but her tone made it clear she wasn't totally on my side. "And how did he take that?" "He got defensive," I snapped. "He made it all about how hard he's working and how I'm ungrateful, like I'm supposed to settle for whatever scraps he decides to throw my way. It's not fair, Heather. I do so much for him, and I don't ask for much in return." "Uh-huh," she said, and I could tell she was holding back whatever she really wanted to say. "Look, Cass, I'm not saying you're wrong to feel disappointed, but maybe you could have handled it differently. Ryan's been stressed out lately, and—" "I don't want to hear it," I cut her off. "He's stressed? What about me? I'm the one keeping everything together while he mopes around about work. The least he could do is show me he appreciates me." Heather sighed. "Okay, but what are you going to do now? Are you going to talk to him when he gets home?" "If he even comes home," I muttered. "Of course he'll come home," she said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. Just maybe take a breath before you talk to him. Think about what you really want to say. I hung up feeling more irritated than comforted. Heather didn't get it. No one did. Everyone always acts like Ryan is some saint because he's trying his best. But what about me? I'm trying to. I've sacrificed so much to keep our lives running smoothly, and no one gives me credit for that. By late afternoon, I still hadn't heard from him. My anxiety started creeping in, but I buried it under anger. If he wasn't going to come to me, I'd go to him. I drove to his office, a small insurance agency downtown, where he'd been working since college. When I got there, his car wasn't in the parking lot. I called him again, and it went straight to voicemail. That's when it hit me. He wasn't anywhere. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. Was he at a friend's house? A bar? Somewhere else? The thought of him being somewhere else made my stomach churn, but I shoved it aside. Ryan wasn't like that. He wasn't the type to cheat or run away. At least, I didn't think he was. When I got home, his car was in the driveway. Relief flooded me for a split second before it was replaced by a fresh wave of anger. I stormed into the house, ready to confront him, but when I walked into the living room, the words caught in my throat. Ryan was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen him. He didn't even look up when I came in. "Where the hell have you been?" I demanded, slamming my bag onto the coffee table. He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and tired. "I needed some time to think," he said flatly. "Think about what?" I shot back. "How to avoid your wife? How to make me feel like crap on our anniversary?" Ryan shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "You just don't get it, do you, Cassie? This isn't about the bracelet. It's not about the anniversary. It's about us. We're not working anymore." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about? Of course we're working. We've been through worse fights than this." "Have we?" he said, his voice low and tired, "because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough for you. I try to show you I care, but you don't want that. You want someone who can give you the world, and I'm not that guy. I never have been." I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out, because deep down, I knew he was right. I did want more than he could give, more than he had ever be able to give. But wasn't that his problem? Not mine. "I just need you to try harder," I said finally, my voice trembling. Ryan laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was bitter and cold. "Try harder? I've been trying for years, Cassie, and all I get in return is you looking at me like I'm a disappointment." "Maybe if you weren't such a disappointment, I wouldn't have to," I shouted before I could stop myself. His face went blank, and in that moment, I knew I'd crossed a line. He stood up, grabbed his keys, and looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was resignation. "I'll be back for my stuff," he said quietly, and then he was gone. When Ryan walked out the door, I stood there in stunned silence. The nerve of him to leave me like that, as if I was the problem. But the shock didn't last long. It quickly turned into rage. How dare he act like I'm the one who's been dragging this marriage down after everything I've put up with. I spent the rest of the evening pacing the house, my thoughts spiraling out of control. He hadn't come home yet, and the longer he stayed away, the more furious I got. I started thinking about all the times I let him off the hook, all the excuses I'd made for him to friends and family. And this is how he repays me? Running off like some drama queen just because I told the truth? But underneath the anger, something else was creeping in. Panic. Ryan might be broke, but if he wanted to divorce me, I'd be screwed. I'm not blind to how things work. If we split up, I wouldn't get much. He doesn't have a lot of money, no hidden savings account, no family trust to fall back on. The thought of trying to survive on my own, paying bills, working some dead-end job just to keep a roof over my head, it made my stomach turn. The idea of being single again was even worse. It's not like I'm 22 and can bounce back from a failed marriage with a fresh start. I'm 34, and while I still look good, I've made sure of that. I know how the world works. It's harder to find someone new at my age, especially someone who can give me the life I deserve. No, getting divorced wasn't an option. Not for me. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. If Ryan thought he could just walk out and leave me hanging, he had another thing coming. He wasn't going anywhere. Not if I had anything to say about it. By the next morning, I had my game face on. I decided to play the part of the remorseful wife, just long enough to get him back under control. I wasn't really sorry, of course. Why should I be? He's the one who started all of this by being so weak and pathetic, but I knew Ryan well enough to know he'd fall for it. He always does. I waited until he came home, which wasn't until late afternoon. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept all night. His clothes were wrinkled, and there was a tension in his shoulders that told me he was on the verge of snapping. Good. That meant he was vulnerable. As soon as he walked through the door, I softened my expression, making sure to look just the right amount of hurt and regretful. "Ryan," I said quietly, stepping toward him, "can we talk?" He looked at me warily, like he wasn't sure whether to stay or run. "What is there to talk about?" he asked, his voice flat. I feel awful about the way things went down," I said, keeping my tone low and shaky. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just overwhelmed, and I took it out on you. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" Ryan blinked, clearly caught off guard. "You're sorry?" he repeated, like he didn't quite believe it. "Yes," I said, forcing myself to sound sincere. "I know I've been hard on you lately, and that's not fair. I love you, Ryan. I don't want us to fall apart over one fight. Please, can we just start over?" I reached out to touch his arm, and for a moment, I thought it was working. He looked at me like he wanted to believe me, like he wanted to forgive me. But then his expression hardened, and he pulled away. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice cold. "You're just saying what you think I want to hear." That caught me off guard. Usually, Ryan would have caved by now. He's always been too soft for his own good. But this time, he wasn't buying it. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound hurt. "Of course I mean it." He shook his head. "No, you don't. You're not sorry, Cassie. You've never been sorry. You just don't want to deal with the consequences of your actions." My heart started pounding, but I kept my face neutral. "That's not true," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "I love you, Ryan. I'm trying to fix this." "Are you?" he shot back, "because it feels like all you care about is yourself. You don't respect me, Cassie. You never have. And I'm done pretending like that's okay." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. He'd never spoken to me like that before, and it stung, in a way, I wasn't prepared for. But then the panic set in again, and I realized I had to double down. If he thought he could leave me, he was wrong. I'd fight him tooth and nail if I had to. "Ryan, please," I said, my voice breaking. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." He stared at me for a long moment, like he was trying to decide whether I was worth the effort. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," he said quietly. "I'll stay for now, but things have to change." I nodded, pretending to agree, but in my head, I was already plotting my next move. If he thought he was going to dictate the terms of our marriage, he had another thing coming. I wasn't going to let him leave me, and I wasn't going to let him take what little stability I had left. If it came down to it, I'd take everything he had. I'd make sure he regretted ever thinking he could walk away from me. For now, though, I had to play nice, let him think he was in control, let him think I was willing to change. But in the back of my mind, I knew the truth. I didn't respect him anymore. Not as a husband, not as a man. And the only reason I was staying in this marriage was because I didn't have a better option. Ryan barely looked at me the next few weeks. The house was tense, the air heavy with things we weren't saying. He went to work, came home, ate in silence, and slept on the couch. I kept up the act for as long as I could, being the apologetic wife, but it wasn't working. He was slipping further and further away, and the reality of it hit me like a brick wall. It didn't take long for me to realize the truth. He was done. No amount of fake apologies or manipulation was going to change that. And if he was going to leave, I had to be ready for it. If I couldn't keep him, I'd make sure he regretted every second of his decision. One night, after another round of silent treatment, I broke the ice. "Are we even going to talk about this, Ryan? Or are you just going to keep acting like I'm not here?" He didn't even look up from the TV. "What's there to talk about, Cassie? You don't want to change, and I can't live like this anymore." I scoffed. "Oh, so now I'm the problem? You're the one who walked out and decided this marriage wasn't worth fighting for." He turned to me, his eyes filled with a kind of sadness that made me uncomfortable. "Cassie, I've been fighting for this marriage since the day we said I do. You're the one who stopped caring. All you see me as is a paycheck that's not big enough for you." That stung, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I threw my hands up in exasperation. "Fine. If that's how you feel, then maybe we should just call it quits." His expression didn't change. "Maybe we should." The words hung in the air, and for a moment I thought I might cry. But instead of sadness, I felt rage bubbling up. He wasn't supposed to agree. He was supposed to beg me to stay, to try harder, to fight for us. But he didn't. "Great," I snapped. "I'll call a lawyer tomorrow." He nodded, like he'd already made peace with it. "Do what you need to do." The divorce process was brutal. Even more so because I went into it with one goal: to make him pay. I wanted everything: the house, the car, whatever savings he had left. The lawyer I hired told me there wasn't much to take, but I didn't care. If I couldn't drain his wallet, I'd drain his spirit. I even found myself wishing we had a kid just so I could get child support out of him. That's how far I was willing to go. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed heartbroken. He didn't fight me on most of it, which only made me angrier. It felt like he was giving up, like he was happy to hand over everything just to get away from me. And maybe he was. He'd always been too soft, too willing to take the high road. It made me sick. By the time the papers were signed, I'd managed to get the house and some spousal support, but it wasn't nearly as much as I'd hoped for. He'd been smart enough to protect what little assets he had left. Still, I thought I'd won. I thought I'd taught him a lesson. But as the weeks went by, the victory felt emptier and emptier. The next few weeks were unbearable. Ryan stayed like he said he would, but it wasn't the same. He was distant, guarded, and barely spoke to me unless it was absolutely necessary. I'd catch him staring off into space like he was trying to figure out how we'd gotten here, or maybe how he could get out. And for the first time, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something that scared me more than anything else. Regret. The tension was suffocating, and it was obvious that neither of us was happy. I kept trying to patch things up, but it wasn't because I wanted to save the marriage. Not really. I just didn't want to deal with the fallout of a divorce. The thought of losing what little stability I had, of having to fend for myself, terrified me. I wasn't built for that kind of life. Ryan was supposed to provide for me, even if he wasn't doing a great job of it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I started resenting him for even thinking about leaving. What kind of man walks out on his wife just because things get hard? If he loved me like he said he did, he'd stay and figure it out. Instead, he was pulling away, leaving me to clean up the mess he'd made of our lives. One night after another silent dinner, I finally snapped. "Are you just going to sit there and sulk forever, or are we going to talk about this?" I demanded, slamming my fork down on the table. Ryan didn't even flinch. He just looked at me, his face completely blank. "There's nothing to talk about, Cassie. We both know this isn't working." I crossed my arms, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, so now you're the victim? Poor Ryan, stuck with the wife who dared to have expectations." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm not trying to play the victim. I'm trying to be honest. This marriage hasn't been good for either of us in a long time, and you know it." I opened my mouth to argue, but he kept going. "You don't respect me. You don't care about me. You care about what I can give you or what you think I should be giving you. And I can't do it anymore, Cassie. I just can't." His words hit harder than I expected, but not because they were untrue. They were. I didn't respect him, and I didn't care about him in the way he probably wanted me to. I cared about what he represented: security, stability, and someone to blame when things didn't go my way. But hearing him say it out loud made it real, and that scared me. "So what, you're just going to leave?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "You're going to throw away everything we've built together?" "What have we built, Cassie?" He shot back. "Debt? Resentment? I've spent years trying to make you happy, and nothing I do is ever enough. I'm tired." The finality in his voice sent a jolt of panic through me. If he left, I'd have nothing. No house, no income, no safety net. I tried to think of something, anything, to make him stay, but all I could feel was desperation. "Fine," I snapped. "If you want a divorce, go ahead. But don't think for a second I'm going to make it easy for you. I'll take everything, Ryan, everything. I wish we had a kid so I could take even more." His face twisted in disgust, and for the first time, I saw the love he'd once had for me completely disappear. "That's who you are, isn't it?" he said quietly. "It's not enough to ruin us. You have to destroy me too. You know what? Do whatever you want, Cassie. I don't care anymore." And with that, it was over. The divorce process was ugly, just like I promised it would be. I fought for the house, for spousal support, for anything I could get my hands on. But Ryan didn't have much to begin with, and by the end of it, I was left with barely enough to keep myself afloat. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting in my tiny apartment scrolling through Facebook when I saw it, a picture of Ryan, smiling like I hadn't seen him smile in years, with a woman who looked like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. She was gorgeous, long blonde hair, perfect smile, and a figure that made my stomach ache with jealousy. I clicked on her profile and started scrolling, my blood boiling with every picture. There they were, holding hands at some fancy restaurant, hiking in the mountains, looking happier than I ever thought Ryan could be. It didn't make sense. How could he move on so quickly? And with someone like her? What did she see in him that I didn't? I tried to tell myself she was probably just like me, fooled by his nice guy act, thinking he was something he wasn't. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Ryan had his flaws, sure, but he'd loved me. I'd been the one who couldn't see it, who couldn't appreciate it. And now, he was giving that love to someone else, someone who probably deserved it more than I ever did. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd lost not just the marriage, but everything. Ryan had moved on, found happiness, while I was stuck here, bitter and alone, scrolling through social media like some pathetic teenager. I shut my laptop and stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of it all crashing down on me. This wasn't how my life was supposed to go. I wasn't supposed to end up in a tiny apartment, working a job I hated just to scrape by. I wasn't supposed to be alone. But this was my reality, and for the first time, I had no one to blame but myself.